In the 1960s, the most valuable thing in music wasn't the song, it wasn't the performance, it was the master recording, the tape. And the label owned it. Not the artist. 12 legends decided to fight that. Some won, some lost everything. All of them changed what came after, starting at number 12. Number 12, Chuck Berry. I saw Maybelline in a coupe de ville. Cadillac rolling on over the road, nothing out of run. And the person who owned all of it was Leonard Chess. When you signed with Chess Records in the 1950s and the early 1960s, you didn't own your masters. You didn't own your publishing in the way you deserved. And the royalty accounting was run by the label. Just trust us, they said. Here's what Leonard Chess never advertised. Chess Records ran one of the most sophisticated royalty manipulation operations in the music business. Can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline. Can't you be true? When Berry first saw a copy of Maybelline, he was shocked to find two other names in the songwriting credits, including DJ Alan Freed, who had been handed credit in exchange for airplay. Those credits meant Freed got a share of every royalty Maybelline ever generated, and Berry got less. He kept recording. Roll Over Beethoven, Johnny B. Good, Sweet Little 16, rock and roll music, Earth. He was generating fortune after fortune for Chess and fighting constantly over what he was actually owed. Then, in 1962, Berry went to federal prison, convicted under the Mann Act. He served nearly 2 years. While he was inside, Chess Records kept selling his music. His name on the covers. His hands on the strings. The money flowing in directions he couldn't touch. When he came out in 1963, the British invasion had happened. The Beatles had covered Roll Over Beethoven. The Rolling Stones were covering his songs. His music was literally defining what rock and roll meant to an entire generation of young musicians, and he still didn't own a note of it. He eventually left Chess for Mercury Records in 1966, where he got better terms for new recordings. But his Chess catalog, Johnny B. Good, Maybelline, everything he wrote at the height of his powers, those masters stayed with Chess, then MCA, then Universal Music Group. You know what's strange about the industry these 12 artists built? The man who invented the foundation of rock and roll never owned a single brick of it. And most of the legends on this list saw what happened to Chuck Berry and still signed the same kind of deals. That's where we're headed, because it gets worse before it gets better. Number 11, the WHO. And blue eyes. No one knows. Now here's a story most people tell wrong. The standard version goes, the Who were just another band fighting their label for control. But that's not what happened. What happened was two managers looked at what Leonard Chess had done to Chuck Berry and to dozens of artists like him and decided they weren't going to let it happen to Pete Townshend. Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp. Two young managers, one a filmmaker's son, one the younger brother of actor Terrence Stamp. They took on the Who in 1964 before anyone thought the band was worth the trouble. By 1966, they'd reached the same conclusion that very few people in the British music industry had yet reached. The labels owned everything, and the only way to stop that was to become the label. In 1967, Lambert and Stamp founded Track Records, their own company, in their own infrastructure, with distribution through Polydor. The entire reason it existed was to give the Who creative ownership and control of their masters in a way that Brunswick Records, where the band had been, never would have allowed. When the Who moved to Polydor and then Track, they negotiated to take the rights to their Brunswick recordings with them. They didn't leave those masters behind. As my conscience sees. Here's what makes this remarkable. Track wasn't a vanity project. It wasn't a branding exercise. Lambert and Stamp structured it as a legitimate label, and they signed other artists on genuinely favorable terms. Jimi Hendrix, who you'll hear about in detail later, was on Track Records in the UK and got better terms there than almost anywhere else. Arthur Brown, Mark Bolan's T-Rex. Track was one of the very first labels in Britain that treated artist ownership as a core part of the deal, not an afterthought. Now it didn't end perfectly. Lambert and Stamp's relationship with the band fractured painfully in the early 1970s. There were financial disputes, addiction, a breakdown of trust that left both sides hurt. The idea was right. The execution got complicated. But in 1967, founding Track Records was a direct, deliberate answer to a direct question. If the labels will never give artists ownership, what do? You build your own table, and you build it before the fight starts, not after. That lesson, that the only real protection is your own infrastructure, echoes through every single entry on this list.
Let's look at the numbers. Only 9% of you are actually subscribed. Honestly, that's tough to see. Our team spends days hunting down archives and verifying every single fact just to tell these stories right. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly part of the community, so please hit subscribe. It costs nothing and helps us immensely. Now, for those already subscribed, very few of you have made the jump to our membership, and that's a hard pill to swallow because you're the ones who know our value best. If this channel has moved you or inspired you, consider joining. It's the price of one coffee, but it's the literal fuel for this channel. Let's keep this alive together. Back to the story.
Number 10, James Brown. James Brown didn't ask for permission. That's the whole story, really. By 1963, James Brown was the most electrifying live performer on the planet. He'd proven it. Live at the Apollo had reached number 2 on the Billboard album chart and stayed on the charts for 66 weeks. Sid Nathan at King Records had fought him on even recording that album, told him nobody would buy a live record. Brown had to personally finance the recording himself to make it happen. The biggest R&B artist in America at the peak of his power paid out of his own pocket to record his own album because his label didn't believe in him. That dynamic had to end. By 1964, Brown set up a company called Fair Deal Record Corporation and walked to Smash Records, a Mercury subsidiary, with his new recordings. His plan: own his masters through his own entity, let Smash handle distribution, and reach the mainstream pop audience he knew was waiting. He'd produce himself. He'd own the recordings. He'd control his own destiny. Sid Nathan sued immediately, got an injunction blocking Mercury from using the voice of James Brown in any capacity. This wasn't a contract dispute. This was a full-scale war. And here's the thing about James Brown. He didn't blink. While the voice injunction held, Brown recorded entirely instrumental albums for Smash under the letter of the court order. He produced other artists. He kept working, kept his name in the industry, while his lawyers battled Nathan for over a year. The standoff ended in 1965. Brown went back to King Records, but not on Nathan's terms. He won significant ground, more creative control, better financial arrangements, far more latitude over what he recorded and where. And most importantly, Sid Nathan had now seen exactly how far James Brown was willing to go. Brown eventually moved his own offices into the King Records building. He had a monogram desk. He served as one of the pallbearers when Sid Nathan died in 1968. He said of Nathan later, "We had fought a lot, but it was arguments between a stern father and a headstrong son." And if you've ever watched someone you built something with, someone you genuinely respected, refused to give you what you'd earned, you know exactly what that kind of complicated grace sounds like. Number 9, The Beach Boys. This one's different from the others because the threat didn't come from the label. Brian Wilson signed the Beach Boys to Capitol Records in 1962, a 7-year deal. By 1966, they'd had #1 hits, survived the British invasion, and Brian was creating what many people still call one of the greatest albums ever made, Pet Sounds. Capitol didn't want Pet Sounds. They wanted another fun. Brian was making art. Capitol's marketing still called them America's top surfing group. While Pet Sounds was convincing Lennon and McCartney to make Sgt. Pepper, the label was wondering why nobody was surfing anymore. So the Beach Boys fought back. In 1966, they formed their own label, Brother Records. Stated goal, complete creative and promotional control over their music. They wanted to produce their own records and own what they created. In February 1967, they sued Capitol for $255,000 in unpaid royalties. They wanted out of their contract. The lawsuit settled. Capitol agreed to distribute Brother Records, or royalties got paid. For just a moment, it looked like they'd won. And here's the part that still haunts this story. While Brian was fighting the label, his father, Murray Wilson, still had control of something called Sea of Tunes, the family publishing company that held the copyright to Brian's songs. California Girls? God only knows. Good Vibrations. Songs written during the most intensely creative period of Brian's life. In November 1969, without telling any of his sons, Murray Wilson sold Sea of Tunes to A&M Records publishing arm for $700,000. Brian Wilson found out from someone else. Just like that, the publishing to his own songs, the songs he had bled to write, was gone. Sold by his own father for a fraction of what those compositions would eventually generate.
Down the same old strip, I gotta find a new place where the kids are hip.
Hundreds of millions of dollars have flowed through those songs since. You can fight the label. You can sue for royalties. You can form your own company. And the threat can still come from the last direction you ever thought to guard.
None of the guys go steady 'cause it wouldn't.
Number 8, Led Zeppelin. Let's talk about leverage, because Jimmy Page understood something in 1968 that almost no one in rock music had yet figured out. When the Yardbirds fell apart and Page assembled a new band, Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, John Bonham, he didn't go to a label first. He went into a studio. He financed the recording sessions himself out of his own pocket. £1,782 for a complete debut album. By rock record standards, almost nothing, but it was Page's money, and that changed every conversation that followed.
Shake for me, yeah. I wanna be your man.
When Page and manager Peter Grant walked into Atlantic Records in late 1968, they weren't desperate artists looking for a deal. They had finished masters of a record Atlantic hadn't paid for, a record that everyone who'd heard it was calling extraordinary. They walked in with power, not just talent. Atlantic, specifically Ahmet Ertegun and Jerry Wexler, had not seen Led Zeppelin play a single live show before they signed them. Didn't matter, they had heard the tapes. The deal was $200,000 advance, the largest ever offered to a new rock group at that point. And here's what that advance bought Atlantic: almost nothing else. Full creative control over recordings, artwork, mixing, and production. Jimmy Page personally mastered every Led Zeppelin album, every single one. Atlantic had no say in that process, no executive veto, no committee. Page also immediately set up their own publishing company, Super Hype Music, before the first album was even released. And in concert, Peter Grant negotiated 90% of gate receipts for the band. The standard split gave promoters 50%. Led Zeppelin took 90%. Here's what gets me about this. Page had spent years as a session musician. He'd played on hundreds of recordings. He'd watched labels build empires on other people's work. He knew exactly how the machine ran. So when Led Zeppelin was built, he built it with insurance. His own money in first, finished work on the table, terms that couldn't be undone after the fact. On paper, a brand new band negotiating from that position in 1968 shouldn't have been possible. It was possible. And every artist who came after them, consciously or not, was negotiating against the precedent Led Zeppelin had set. Number 7, Creedence Clearwater Revival. Now here's the other side of that lesson. What happens when you build something extraordinary as thin and you do it without insurance? John Fogerty was a teenager when he first signed with Fantasy Records in Berkeley, California. It was 1964. The band was calling themselves the Gollywogs. Fogerty had no lawyer, nobody looking out for him. He was a kid from El Chorrito who wanted to make records, and Fantasy was offering him a deal. He had no idea what he was giving away. When Saul Zaentz bought Fantasy Records in 1967, he gave the band a real shot. Renamed them Creedence Clearwater Revival, pushed for a proper album. What came next was one of the most extraordinary creative runs in rock history. Proud Mary, Bad Moon Rising, Fortunate Son, Have You Ever Seen the Rain? 7 top 5 singles in just over 2 years. In 1969, Creedence Clearwater Revival outsold the Beatles. They played Woodstock, and John Fogerty, who wrote every single one of those songs, played lead guitar, sang lead vocals, and produced the records. Owned none of it. Not the publishing, not the masters. All of it belonged to Saul Zaentz.
People say you have from what you see.
When the band split in 1972, Fogerty was still under contract. He eventually gave up all artist royalties from the Creedence catalog just to escape the deal. Then here's the part that I need you to really sit with. Fogerty refused to perform his own songs live for 15 years. 15 years, because every time Proud Mary was played in a venue, Zaentz collected. So Fogerty stopped playing Proud Mary. Bob Dylan reportedly convinced him to start again, told him, "If you don't sing those songs, people will think they belong to Tina Turner." Meanwhile, Saul Zaentz used the Creedence royalties to fund his film career. He produced One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Amadeus, The English Patient, 3 films that won Best Picture at the Academy Awards, largely financed by music John Fogerty wrote as a teenager with no lawyer in the room. In January 2023, 50 years later, Fogerty finally bought back majority ownership of his publishing. He said, "I am finally reunited with my songs. This is something I thought would never be a possibility." 50 years. Remember that number as we head into the second half of this list. Number 6, the Rolling Stones. In 1965, Alan Klein walked into a Decca Records boardroom with the Rolling Stones standing behind him in dark glasses, and he told Decca's chairman, "The Rolling Stones won't be recording for Decca anymore." The room went quiet, and then Klein negotiated a $1.25 million advance, the largest deal Decca had ever written for a rock act.
I went to the Chelsea drugstore.
The Stones called him a gangster figure, and they meant it as a compliment. Mick Jagger recommended him to the Beatles shortly after. That tells you exactly how impressive Klein seemed in that moment. They should have looked at the fine print. When that $1.25 million arrived, it didn't go into the Rolling Stones account. It went into a company Klein had quietly created called Nanker Felg USA, a name almost identical to the band's own publishing entity, but legally separate, with Klein as the sole stockholder. The fine print stipulated he wasn't required to release that money to the Stones for 20 years. Meanwhile, Klein had engineered a separate arrangement that transferred ownership of the publishing rights to all Rolling Stones recordings from that era to his control. The masters, the songs, both, and the band had signed it. In 1970, the Stones fired Klein. What followed were nearly 2 decades of lawsuits. Mick Jagger eventually summarized the outcome with characteristic bluntness. He and London and Decca have the rights to repackage all our old material between 1963 and 1969.
To my friend, Mr. Jimmy, and you said one word to me.
A BKCO, Klein's company, still owns the Rolling Stones masters from that entire era. Satisfaction, Paint It Black, Sympathy for the Devil, Let It Bleed, every recording from the peak of their original power. Still, today, over 60 years later,
Always get what you want, honey, and you cannot always.
if you're wondering whether that's possible, yeah, it is. And the money those recordings generate has never stopped flowing away from the people who made them. And here's the detail that ties this directly to the next entry. Mick Jagger was so pleased with Alan Klein's results that he personally recommended him to John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Yeah.
And you can't always satisfy.
Number 5, The Beatles. On a February morning in 1963, John Lennon and Paul McCartney were driven to a small house in Liverpool. No lawyers they trusted were in the room. A man named Dick James had some papers. Their manager, Brian Epstein, told them to sign. They signed. What they'd signed was the founding document of Northern Songs Limited, a company created to publish every song written by Lennon and McCartney. Dick James and his partner owned 50%. Epstein got 10%. Lennon and McCartney got 20% each. In roughly 20 minutes, the most valuable songwriting catalog in history transferred away from the people who wrote it. McCartney said later, "We just signed this thing not really knowing what it was, that we were signing our rights away. I know now through having a publishing company that you can at any point, we were signed to a slave contract." George Harrison wrote a song about his own cut of the arrangement, only a Northern song. He said, I realized Dick James had conned me out of the copyrights for my own songs. It was a blatant theft. By 1965, Northern Songs went public on the London Stock Exchange. The Lennon-McCartney stakes were diluted further. Then in 1969, John Lennon was on his honeymoon with Yoko Ono when he learned from a morning newspaper that Dick James had sold his shares in Northern Songs to television executive Lou Grade's ATV without calling Lennon, without calling McCartney, without giving them a chance to buy him out. Lennon found out from a newspaper on his honeymoon. He called McCartney immediately. Together, they tried to mount a counterbid. They failed. By October 1969, ATV controlled 92% of the company. During the Beatles' catalog was gone. In 1985, Michael Jackson bought the ATV catalog for $47.5 million. McCartney had explained the value of music publishing to Jackson, genuinely as a business lesson between friends. Not understanding Jackson was already planning his move, Jackson outbid him. The catalog became Sony/ATV, now Sony Music Publishing. McCartney has spent more than 50 years trying to get those songs back. He's not done yet. And if you're wondering how the most successful band in history could have this happen to them, you're asking the right question. The answer is always the same. They were young, they were trusting, and someone put a pin in front of them before they fully understood what they were holding. Number 4, Jimi Hendrix. October 15, 1965, Harlem, New York. Jimi Hendrix, then Jimi Hendrix, a struggling session guitarist working pickup gigs, walked into a recording facility called Studio 76. He was there to lay down some demos with a singer named Curtis Knight. The session was organized by a producer named Ed Chalpin. At the end of the session, Chalpin handed Hendrix a piece of paper and told him it was a release form, standard paperwork acknowledging he'd been paid for his time. It wasn't a release form. It was a 3-year exclusive recording contract with Chalpin's company, PPX Enterprises. Hendrix signed it. He was paid $1 and a 1% royalty rate. $1 for 3 years of exclusive recordings from the man who would become the greatest guitarist who ever lived. Hendrix didn't become famous yet. Dude, not right away. In 1966, Chas Chandler, the Animals' bassist, spotted him playing in Greenwich Village, recognized something extraordinary, and brought him to London. The Jimi Hendrix experience formed. Hey Joe, Purple Haze, The Wind Cries Mary. By mid-1967, Hendrix was the most exciting guitarist on the planet, and Ed Chalpin was reading about it in the music trade press. He immediately notified every company doing business with Hendrix that he held a valid exclusive 3-year contract covering Hendrix from October 1965 through October 1968, the exact period that included Are You Experienced, the album that changed everything. The lawsuits followed Hendrix everywhere, across every success, every award, every standing ovation. Reprise Records, his American label, settled with Chalpin in 1968 by surrendering the rights to one future Hendrix album to Capitol Records. That's why Band of Gypsies ended up on Capitol. Not a creative decision, a legal debt owed to a man who had tricked a young musician into signing for $1. Jimi Hendrix died in September 1970, 27 years old, still legally entangled with Ed Chalpin's PPX contract. His family spent the next 3 decades in litigation. In 2003, they finally prevailed. In 2014, they purchased the original PPX master tapes, nearly 50 years after a session where someone handed a young guitarist a document and told him it was just paperwork. If you've ever been told to just sign something by someone in a position of power, and you felt that pull between trust and caution, you know exactly what it cost Jimi Hendrix to learn that lesson the hardest possible way. Number 3, Ray Charles.
Blackjack game going on, you know what I mean? And I somehow got...
Now I want to tell you about the one who figured it out before almost anyone else, and who actually got what he came for. In 1959, Ray Charles was at the peak of his creative power at Atlantic Records. He'd built something genuinely revolutionary there, mixing gospel, jazz, blues, and R&B into a sound that nobody had assembled before. Ahmet Ertegun loved him. Jerry Wexler loved him. They treated him well by the standards of what the industry was at the time.
I'm gonna have to take my thing and go.
And then ABC Paramount came calling with an offer that changed the entire conversation. Higher annual advance, higher royalties. But here's the part that mattered. Eventual ownership of his own master recordings after the contract period concluded. His own executive producer credit meaning he controlled every creative decision on every album, his own publishing company. And here's what you have to understand about how radical this was. At the time of that negotiation, Frank Sinatra didn't own his masters at Capitol. The idea of any artist owning their recordings was considered extraordinary. The idea of a black artist owning their recordings in 1959 America was nearly unthinkable. Ray Charles had his manager Joe Adams in the room, and they got it, all of it. He signed with ABC Paramount at the end of 1959. His first #1 pop hit, Georgia on My Mind, came in 1960, followed by 4 Grammys, then Hit the Road Jack, then I Can't Stop Loving You, Millionaire. And here's what he did with that position. He built his own recording studio in Los Angeles, RPM International. Then he launched his own imprint, Tangerine Records. By the mid-1960s, ABC Paramount was renting studio time from Ray Charles to make his own albums. The label was paying him to use his facility to record his own music. He didn't just negotiate ownership, he built an infrastructure around it, and then he used that infrastructure to make the label dependent on him instead of the other way around. Ray Charles understood something that the industry spent decades refusing to admit publicly. The master recording is the asset, not the performance, not the name, the tape. And if you're smart enough to ask for it before anyone realizes what you're asking, you can own what you create. He was 30 years old when he made that deal. By any standard, one of the most intelligent moves in music history. Number 2, Frank Sinatra. February 13th, 1960. Frank Sinatra formally launched Reprise Records, his own label, and Capitol Records, where he'd spent the previous 7 years making some of the greatest pop albums ever recorded, was furious. Here's what had happened. When Sinatra went to renegotiate his Capitol contract, he asked for one thing: ownership of his master recordings after a set period. Capitol's chief, Alan Livingston, said no. Flat number. So Sinatra spent $200,000 of his own money, when $200,000 was a genuinely staggering sum, to build a competing label from scratch, while still legally obligated to fulfill his existing Capitol contract. Think about what that took. He had to finish out his Capitol obligations while simultaneously building a company whose entire purpose was to make Capitol obsolete. Capitol, for their part, rushed competing Sinatra product to market, repackaged his old recordings, and did everything in their power to make Reprise fail before it found its footing. He named it Reprise. He said it was because he wanted albums people would want to play again and again. There may have been a secondary motivation. In French, reprise also means reprisal. At Reprise, the contract terms work differently. Artists own their masters. Creative decisions belong to the people making the records. Sinatra brought in Dean Martin. Sammy Davis Jr. built a roster around that philosophy. The commercial footing was difficult early on. In 1963, he sold 2/3 of Reprise to Warner Brothers for financial stability. But he kept 1/3, a seat on the board, and crucially, the philosophy. Without exemption. Mo Austin, who ran Reprise after the Warner deal, extended that artist-first approach to a new generation. Neil Young signed there, Jimi Hendrix signed there, eventually Fleetwood Mac. The label Frank Sinatra built out of personal frustration and principle became one of the most important record companies in the history of rock music. But now, as tears subside. Here's what I think about when I picture Frank Sinatra in 1960. He wasn't a young artist who didn't understand contracts. He was the most famous entertainer in America. He had options. He could have accepted Capitol's terms and been fine. He chose not to. He spent his own money. He built something on principle at significant personal and financial risk because he believed the person who created the work should own it. That idea, that specific, radical, expensive idea is exactly, what the number one artist on this list built their entire legacy around.
What has he got?
Number 1, Sam Cooke.
Honest you do, honest you do.
You could argue this is where everything started. Not the legal battles, not the courtrooms and the lawyers and the fine print. The actual idea, the core of it, that an artist could own what they created, that the master recording belonged to the person who made the music. Sam Cooke understood this before almost anyone else in the industry, and he didn't just understand it, he did something about it. In 1959, Sam Cooke and his partner J.W. Alexander founded SIR Records in Los Angeles, a small office on Hollywood Boulevard, 2 desks and a piano. But the intent behind it was enormous. A label where black artists could make music and maintain ownership of what they created, where the people doing the work controlled the masters.
To marry you and take you home.
He was the first major black artist in American history to own his own record label. Let that settle for a moment. In an industry built generation after generation on the exploitation of black talent, where Chess Records, where every major label had made fortunes from artists who received almost nothing, Sam Cooke built a structure where ownership was the starting point, not the exception.
It's lasted so long.
At the same time, he renegotiated his deal with RCA Records to route his commercial recordings through his own Tracy Records imprint. He controlled production. He built his own recording studio. He wasn't just fighting for a contract clause. He was building an entire operating system for artist ownership, a complete functional infrastructure at a time when the industry had no framework for this and no interest in creating one. The artists on SAR you'd recognize. Billy Preston recorded there. Bobby Womack's group, the Valentinos, were on SAR. It's All Over Now, the song the Rolling Stones covered and made famous, was originally released on Sam Cooke's label. If you've ever heard that song and nodded along, not knowing why it felt so lived in, now you know. He was 33 years old, at the absolute peak of his commercial power. He was close friends with Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. The FBI was watching him. A rich, powerful, independent black man in 1964 with his own label, his own studio, his own publishing company, and plans for national distribution.
I know you thrill me.
On December 11th, 1964, Sam Cooke was shot and killed at a motel in Los Angeles. The official account of that night has been contested for 60 years. What is not contested is this. Within 3 months of his death, I'm Alan Klein. The same Alan Klein who would later take the Rolling Stones masters through small print trickery, the same Alan Klein who would later help divide the Beatles, had taken control of Sam Cooke's entire catalog. Everything he had built, everything he had owned, gone in 3 months.
Thrill me, honest you do.
Billy Preston later said, he was fighting for something bigger than music. He wanted to show that we could own our work, that it was possible. It was possible. He proved it. And then it was taken from him in a way nobody has fully explained, even now. Here's what I want you to hold on to after this video. Sam Cooke's fight for ownership didn't just impact him. Every artist in the decades that followed, every artist who negotiated for their masters, who started their own label, who refused to accept a standard deal, they were standing on ground Sam Cooke prepared, often without knowing his name was underneath them.
First I thought it was infatuation.
Sinatra changed the industry's terms. Ray Charles changed what a black artist could demand. Led Zeppelin changed the leverage. John Fogerty became a cautionary tale that still gets told in law schools. But Sam Cooke changed what was imaginable. He made it possible for an entire generation of artists to conceive of ownership as something that could belong to them. And Alan Klein understood exactly how dangerous that power was, which is exactly why he came for it.